bright red houses stand out vividly against the desert of snow. The silhouette of a polar bear stands proudly on an icebreaker beneath the aurora. The window of an abandoned stilt house faces the churning ocean. What do these scenes suggest? When all connections are severed, will we find ourselves or be swallowed by the void? Perhaps the edge of the world is a mirror, sharply reflecting our fragility. We always move forward with absolute faith that this civilization has grown strong enough to cover the entire planet. The modern world map is filled with grid lines, dense satellite networks in the atmosphere, and cities that never sleep. Humans pride themselves on the fact that no coordinate remains beyond the control of connecting algorithms. But there is a reality we often deliberately choose to forget. At the very top of the globe, there exists a vast, freezing void, utterly indifferent to all human efforts of conquest. The Arctic region. It is not merely a geographical zone of perpetual ice and snow, but a frontier of perception where reality begins to fracture and our illusions of knowledge dissolve. Each frozen ghost town, or each lonely community clinging to the edge of the earth, is not truly a story about geography. They are living evidence, deep cuts into the arrogance of civilization, proving that the reality out there is always stranger than any science fiction novel. The deeper humans venture into these extreme coordinates, the fewer answers they find about the physical world. Instead, they are forced to confront the thinnest boundary of their own minds and human existence. Look at this. A journey heading north is not to seek new lands, but to see our true nature when stripped of all the soft protective layers of modern society. You will realize that humans understand far less about this world than they assume. And the world, in the quietest way, has always been filled with astonishing things beyond the sight of the crowd. Listen to that sound. It comes from a massive, 3-meter-thick ice sheet, slowly closing off the only exit of a small town named Itokortormiit. For 9 continuous months, the surrounding ocean turns into a solid block of ice, completely isolating a few hundred people from the rest of humanity. You see a frozen prison. You feel the terror of solitude. But look closer into the eyes of the hunter standing beneath the amber midnight sun. He is not waiting for a rescue ship. He is waiting for the soft breath of a seal from a small breathing hole in the ice. Why does a community consider 9 months of icy imprisonment a great privilege and view summer, when cruise ships dock, as a harsh intrusion? The secret lies in an ancient covenant carved in flesh and blood. When the internet vanishes, survival is mapped by sharing every single piece of hunted meat. Here, a dentist must fly through hundreds of miles of blizzards just to save a child from a toothache, amidst the cold that can freeze breath the moment it leaves the mouth. Humans do not fight the ice, they turn it into a bridge. Solitude, it turns out, is not about how many people are out there in the world, but whether you can hear the whisper of the land supporting your footsteps. Leaving the isolated fortress of sea ice, reality continues to challenge us with another form of adaptation, where man-made architecture seems to play with Earth's gravity. Gray, dilapidated wooden stilt houses cling tightly to the sheer cliffs of a lonely rocky island in the frozen Bering Sea. They look like wooden bird nests suspended in midair, ready to be blown into the abyss by storms at any moment. Why did a tribe choose to build their entire lives hanging off a deadly cliff without a single square meter of flat ground? Look at this structure. Not a single square meter of flat ground. These houses have stood firm against the Arctic's greatest storms for centuries, using the wind force itself to lock the structure to the cliffside. In the 1950s, the US government closed the only school on the island and threatened to cut off all supplies if the residents did with not migrate to the mainland. The village was abandoned not because of natural disasters, but because of a cold administrative decree. The Inupiat chose this cliff because it provided them with a perfect 360-degree view to spot migrating seals and king crabs. Do the spirits of their ancestors truly still inhabit these wooden houses, decaying with time to guard the Bering Sea? The struggle of the descendants of King Island today, who every summer attempt to row through rough seas back to this rocky island just to sit in the old stilt houses of their fathers and weep in the cold wind, reminds us of a profound truth. Home is not just a shelter, it is a spiritual root. When you strip a human away from where they belong, you take away a part of their soul. The progress of civilization is sometimes a brutal force, destroying the most unique and free adapted ways of life in the name of safety. When ancient adaptive structures are wiped out by administrative decisions, the very modern cities built with the grandest technological ambitions are also bound to face the fate of being frozen by time. Amidst the frozen desert of the Svalbard archipelago, the stone gaze of Lenin stares fixedly at rows of apartment buildings. All are empty. Not a single footstep. How could a model town, once home to thousands of workers with the highest welfare benefits of a superpower, turn into a frozen graveyard in just a matter of days in 1998? The coal mine at Pyramiden never turned a profit. The truth is stranger than that. This entire city was erected solely to prove an illusion that human will could restructure the indifference of nature. Currently, the extreme cold of the Arctic acts as a massive freezer, preventing all decay of wood, paper, and metal. If you step into a room in Pyramiden, a half-drunk cup still sits on the table. A miner's journal remains open at the final page as if they just stepped outside for a few minutes. 500 years from now, when our modern cities may have crumbled to dust, Pyramiden will still stand there. A single current guard now walks through the town with a rifle on his shoulder. What we build to flaunt power in the end is merely an artifact on display in Earth's Museum of Indifference. The desolation of a town can be measured in bricks and stone, but the wilderness of a volcanic island is measured by the silent collapse of the human mind. Why did a small group of soldiers and meteorologists volunteer to live in rotation on this lonely volcanic island, where ocean storms and darkness can warp their perception? People often assume this is a romantic and peaceful scientific research job amidst majestic nature. But the truth is far harsher than that. John Mayen syndrome is a real paranoid state. The combination of the continuous, unceasing roar of the wind, the fog that never clears, and physical solitude has caused many healthy people to start hearing invisible voices and fall into deep depression. What happens when the human brain is deprived of all the usual sensory stimuli of civilization? It does not stop. It begins to consume itself, fabricating auditory hallucinations to fill the endless void out there. Jan Mayen is an extremely hostile environment geographically and psychologically. The human presence here is solely to maintain essential international maritime navigation stations and weather forecasting for the entire North Atlantic region. Will the Beerenberg volcano, currently still active beneath hundreds of meters of thick ice, erupt once more and wipe out this fragile man-made station before humans can evacuate? The moment the thick fog suddenly tears apart for a few minutes, revealing the peak of Beerenberg volcano glowing brightly under a crimson sunset, looking like an icy god guarding the gates of hell. The story of a young soldier who had to lock himself in a closed room and listen repeatedly to a tape recording of rain falling on leaves back in his hometown to keep himself from going mad during the long winter reveals a core truth. The human mind needs the living natural world to shape its own existence. Without it, we dissolve from within. While the human mind must find ways to cling to memories for survival, at another coordinate, they must learn to share their living space with the planet's most dangerous predators to exist. Imagine stepping out of your front door and seeing the playground where your children used to run around slowly being swallowed by the ground. In Dixon, high-rise apartment buildings do not collapse from earthquakes. They are sinking into nothingness as the permafrost, something that was as hard as steel for thousands of years, melts into thin mud. And right beside those decaying ruins is the breath of polar bears. On the snow-covered streets, 3 large polar bears amble past an abandoned children's playground, stalking the rare lit windows. How can the few hundred remaining residents in Russia's northernmost port town survive when they have been abandoned by the national economy, while becoming direct prey for the world's largest land carnivore? People often believe that residents will arm themselves to the teeth and hunt down the bears to protect themselves. But reality in Dixon is not like that. Why is shooting bears here considered illegal? And why do residents accept the status of the weaker party on their own territory? In Dixon, there is an unwritten law: no one locks their house doors at night. The collapse of Dixon is the consequence of climate change weakening the foundations of buildings combined with the withdrawal of the state, turning a bustling seaport into a cold historical junkyard. The permafrost beneath the town, hard as rock for thousands of years, is now melting into slushy mud.
When this layer of soil completely dissolves in the coming decades, will Dixon disappear entirely into the Arctic ground? Behold the green northern lights dancing vividly across the sky of Dixon, illuminating the silhouette of a polar bear. An elderly woman in Dixon decides not to lock her front door at night, not because security is good, but so that any passerby encountering a polar bear can open the door and dive inside for shelter in time. In the harshest circumstances, our survival is not determined by confrontation, but by the adaptability and mutual shelter of the vulnerable. Adaptation to predators in Dixon is ultimately a survival choice, but there are places where human presence is entirely the result of a cold political arrangement. A few tiny wooden houses rest silently at the foot of the gray, ice-capped Rocky Mountains of Ellesmere Island, Canada's most remote outpost. A stone monument, carving the shape of an Inuit woman holding her child, stares out at the endless frozen sea with sorrowful eyes. Why did the government move a group of Inuit families from warmer bays up to this harsh land in 1953? Most of us would think this was a humanitarian assistance program to help the Inuit find new, more fertile hunting grounds. But this was actually a deception, amidst the height of the Cold War. To assert territorial sovereignty against other superpowers, they needed border markers. And these Inuit families were the living flagpoles of flesh and blood. Upon arrival, the migrants discovered a completely barren land with no familiar food sources and no way to return. They had to teach themselves how to hunt beluga whales and polar bears in the absolute darkness of winter to avoid starving to death. Grise Fjord was born not from a natural need for settlement, but from the cold calculation of the national geopolitical map. Will official apologies and belated compensation packages ever heal the pain of losing a homeland and the generational fracture of the people here? Listen to a third-generation Inuit child standing on a high cliff, singing an ancient song in the Inuktitut language that echoes across the frozen bay. The story of an Inuit mother who had to use her own tears to melt the ice on stiff, dry sealskins to sew warm clothes for her child during that terrifying first winter leaves a long silence. Behind the boundaries of power drawn on the maps of empires are always the small human destinies that must bear the most devastating consequences. National sovereignty is sometimes built on the silent sacrifice and injustice imposed upon the most vulnerable communities. When national boundaries turn humans into chess pieces on land, in the middle of the ocean, it bends our very perception of time and space. From the window of a house, on the rocky island of Little Diomede, you can see another island just 4 kilometers away across the frozen water. But if you step onto that ice sheet to walk toward the other island, you're not just crossing the border between America and Russia. You're walking straight into tomorrow. According to the international dateline, the opposite island is always 21 hours ahead of you. You are seeing the future with the naked eye, but a geopolitical curtain of ice has forbidden all contact between the residents of the two islands for over 70 years. Imagine 2 biological brothers separated by an invisible line drawn on a map in 1948. For decades, all they could do was stand at the edge of their island's cliff, using all their might to scream the other's name loudly across the roaring wind of the Bering Strait. The only exit from this island during winter is a makeshift runway cleared right on the frozen sea surface, ready to crack at any moment under the impact of underground ocean currents. Crossing the invisible boundaries that divide humans, we arrive at a coordinate where humanity is forced to turn off its own noise to listen to sounds from outer space. The giant antenna dishes of space stations point straight into the Arctic sky, vibrant with auroras. Surrounding them are prominent yellow signs, with text in multiple languages strictly prohibiting the use of wireless transmitting devices under very severe penalties. Why does a settlement of the world's leading scientists voluntarily live in a world of absolute technological sterility, where even a mobile phone or Bluetooth headset is viewed as a serious threat? Viewers assume this is a military security measure or a psychological experiment on digital detox. But the real reason carries a completely different color. This radio ban is to protect the station's ultra-sensitive cosmic signal receiving equipment. The antenna dishes here are so sensitive that a tiny Wi-Fi signal from your phone is like a piercing scream in their ears, completely drowning out the gentle whisper from stars millions of light years away from Earth. Ny-Ålesund is home to the cleanest air and the least electromagnetic pollution on the planet.
Scientists here are measuring the smallest changes in the ozone layer and cosmic radiation to forecast the future of Earth. To hear the whispering sounds of the universe and of this very planet, humans are forced to turn off all the artificial noise created by themselves. Can modern humans maintain quiet research stations like this? When low-orbit satellite constellations begin to blanket every square meter of the planet with electromagnetic waves, the deep connection between scientists from multiple opposing nations living together in a single communal dining hall, sharing every piece of bread and family story in the silence of phone signals, brings a new perspective. To understand the great truths of the universe and ourselves, sometimes we must learn to be silent and let go of superficial daily connections. The continuous connection by current technology is actually making us lose our deepest connection with nature and the vast universe. But while a group of people stays silent to listen to the universe, in another hidden corner, the Arctic ground still bears deep scars from humanity's nuclear ambitions. A heavily fortified military town of gray concrete stands bare on a lonely archipelago. In the distance is the pitch-black, threatening frozen bay. Why do thousands of people still live and work on a desolate island that was once the test site for hundreds of nuclear explosions, including the bomb with the most terrifying power in human history? Many believe this place has been completely cleared of radiation, and that current life is entirely normal, as safe as any other town. But the truth is that the ghost of radiation still hovers. Residents here must comply with strict routine inspection procedures. Water and food sources are tightly monitored. Belushia Guba exists as a top-secret military command and nuclear research center. This is the place that maintains the ultimate strategic deterrence of this nation within the wild Arctic. This island is proof that humans are willing to turn the most pristine and beautiful lands of the Earth into testing grounds for weapons of mass destruction in the name of security. How much longer will the rusted nuclear waste barrels buried under the surrounding seabed, since the Cold War, endure before their metal shells are completely corroded? Look closely at a tiny pale yellow snowflake flower trying to bloom on a concrete crack of an old, abandoned nuclear shelter. The story of a military doctor in the town who daily cares for the health of children born here, always struggling psychologically between loyalty and the invisible fear of potential genetic damage in the genes of future generations, evokes a profound sadness. The greatest weapons of destruction are not located in major cities, but are hidden away and tested in the most remote, desolate corners of the planet. And then, moving past all the ruins of war, the silent scientific stations, or the villages hanging on cliffs, we reach the final point of our journey, walking on the ground. Humanity's final outpost before the endless void, a cluster of gray metal buildings encrusted with frost, sitting lonely amidst an endless desert of pure white snow at 82 degrees north latitude. Above is a pitch-black night sky without a single star due to the ice fog, with only the ultra-powerful searchlights from the station shining straight into the void of nothingness. What happens to a person's psychology when they live at the northernmost permanently inhabited settlement on Earth, where there is no natural life form like plants or insects, and thousands of miles away from the nearest city? People often think the residents here are emotionless steel warriors, unaffected by the harshness of the environment. But the solitude at Alert ravages the human psychology silently. The alert stare is a common phenomenon when soldiers here stare into the endless void for hours without blinking. Station Alert operates as an eye to gather military signals intelligence and is the most important climate monitoring station in the high Arctic region. Its existence requires a massive supply system by military air transport that is extremely expensive and dangerous. Alert is the final boundary of human life on Earth. Living here is like living on a space station in outer space. Humans are entirely dependent on technology to maintain every breath and drop of warm water. If a global crisis breaks out and cuts off supply flights for a single winter month, can the people at this final outpost survive the minus 50 degrees Celsius cold and perpetual darkness? The tradition of Alert residents when they gather to decorate a small plastic Christmas tree in the center of the station. Each person hanging on it, a photo of their family back home, creates a single warm point of light amidst millions of square miles of soulless ice. The audience leaves with the realization that our Earth is actually incredibly vast and cold. The warm civilization we live in is just a tiny, fragile spark amidst the endless Arctic void. The journey across these 10 extreme coordinates is not a tour to collect geographical facts or dry statistics. When we stand at the edge of the world, looking at the stilt houses precariously hanging on the cliffs of King Island, the apartment buildings sinking due to melting soil in Dixon, or the scientists who must turn off their own phones in Ny-Ålesund, we are not truly seeing the Arctic. We are looking into a great mirror reflecting humanity. The nature of this world is always stranger, more complex, and contains more mysteries than what scientific models or political theories can explain. We think we understand the world, think we have tamed nature with concrete fortresses and radio waves. But in reality, humans understand far less than they imagine. These 10 locations exist as a proud reminder of the limits of knowledge. When industrial ambitions, cold geopolitical calculations, or the power displays of empires fade into the past, what remains on the icy landscape are only silent ruins. The Arctic nature does not need to be conquered, and it does not care about the flags humans attempt to plant upon its surface. It stands there, immutable, silent, and vast, to teach us a lesson in humility. But it is precisely within that extreme emptiness and harshness that another miracle is lit. That is the beauty of humanity. Human survival at the edge of the globe does not come from the strength of weapons or the sophistication of machines, but from the smallest and warmest things: a covenant to share hunted meat in Itokortormit, an unlocked door for strangers to avoid bears in Dixon, or family photos hanging on a plastic tree in Alert. We are a fragile species, but we know how to warm each other's souls with memories and love when standing before the void. Look back at this entire journey under a deeper existential lens. Amidst a vast, dark, and cold universe, our Earth is actually just a small alert station. It is a fragile outpost filled with life drifting aimlessly amidst the endless void of space. We, the residents on this blue spaceship, are sometimes too busy with urban noise, superficial connections, and petty power struggles, to the point of forgetting that we are living in the single warm spark inside the perpetual winter of the universe. Perhaps, what the audience needs to carry with them after gazing at these Arctic outposts is not the names of the places, but a sense of absolute wonder at their own existence. This world is larger than we think, reality is stranger than we imagine, and life somehow remains the most astonishing thing ever to appear under the sky. Hold onto that humility and appreciation. Because at the coldest edge of the earth, where no map wishes to draw completely, humans do not find new land. They only find the final boundary of their own soul.